Picture a software architect in Austin, 38 years old. Base salary of $310,000 plus equity that pushed her total comp past $500,000 last year. She drives a leased Tesla Model X. Her townhouse in a gated community runs $5,100 a month. Her kids attend a private Montessori school. She orders Whole Foods delivery 3 times a week and takes at least 2 international trips a year. On paper, she's rich. Ask her how she's doing financially and she'll tell you she's hanging on. Ask her to produce $8,000 in cash for an emergency without touching a credit line, and she can't do it. This isn't rare. This isn't even unusual. Survey after survey on high-income households finds a consistent, uncomfortable pattern. Somewhere between a third and a half of people earning well into 6 figures report living paycheck to paycheck. Not people scraping by on minimum wage. People earning more in 2 months than many American households earn in a year. Read that again. A meaningful chunk of $500,000 earners feel like they have no cushion at all. The assumption almost everyone carries is that income solves the problem. Hit 6 figures and the stress goes away. Cross $300,000 and you're finally safe. Get to $500,000 and money stops being something you think about. The data says otherwise. What you're looking at has a name: the high-income poverty trap. People earn more, spend more, save roughly the same tiny percentage of nothing, and arrive at 50 wondering where all of it went. The trap doesn't care about your income bracket. It only cares about the gap between what comes in and what stays. This isn't about shaming anyone's spending. It's about understanding a pattern that quietly wrecks the finances of people who assumed a high income made them immune. Let's break down exactly how it works, who it catches, and how to know if you're already inside it. The income stress paradox. Here's the part that breaks people's intuition. Higher earners frequently report more financial anxiety than moderate earners, not less. Financial researchers who study spending behavior across income brackets keep finding the same shape. Stress doesn't fall in a straight line as income rises. It dips for a while, then climbs right back up in households earning $150,000 to $400,000 because expenses climbed with it. Why would someone earning 4 times the median income feel 4 times more squeezed instead of 4 times more secure? Because nothing about their spending scaled proportionally to safety. It scaled proportionally to appearance. This is lifestyle inflation, and it operates with almost no friction. A $12 lunch becomes a $28 lunch. The reliable sedan becomes a luxury SUV lease. The 2-bedroom apartment becomes a house with a den nobody uses and a yard nobody has time for. Each single upgrade is defensible in isolation. You earned it. You can technically afford the payment. The math works on paper. But the upgrades stack. Savings stay flat while the fixed costs multiply. And once a luxury becomes routine, going back to normal feels like punishment instead of what it actually is, a return to baseline. It's worth sitting with how gradual this is. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to commit their entire income to lifestyle maintenance. It happens through 100 small yeses. Yes to the nicer gym. Yes to the bigger closet. Yes to the second car so nobody has to coordinate schedules. Each yes arrives with its own justification, and each justification sounds completely reasonable in isolation. The problem only becomes visible when you zoom out and look at all the yeses stacked together, which almost nobody does until something forces them to. What real wealth builders look like. Here's the twist almost nobody expects. The research on actual millionaires shows a lifestyle that looks almost nothing like what a $500,000 earner typically lives. Multiple studies on self-made wealth, going back to the original Millionaire Next Door research, and echoed in newer wealth surveys, describe people who live in ordinary neighborhoods, drive vehicles that are years old, and rarely display the money they've accumulated. The architect leasing a Tesla looks wealthier than the electrician down the street driving a 12-year-old pickup truck. But the electrician might have $1.8 million invested, no debt, and total control over his schedule. The architect has equity on paper and a mortgage that requires both her income and her partner's to stay afloat. There's a simple, brutal formula worth knowing here. Take your age, multiply it by your pre-tax household income. Divide by 10. That's roughly what your net worth should be if you're accumulating wealth at a normal rate for your earnings. A 40-year-old earning $300,000 should be sitting on approximately $1.2 million. Most high earners, when they actually run this number, come in dramatically short. They're not building wealth. They're financing a lifestyle that happens to be expensive. The people who pass this test and the people who fail it aren't separated by income. They're separated by what percentage of that income they actually keep. This is where the label prodigious accumulator of wealth versus under-accumulator of wealth becomes useful. It's entirely possible for someone earning a modest income to be a prodigious accumulator, quietly building a seven-figure net worth through consistent saving over decades. It's equally possible and far more common than people assume for someone earning $400,000 or $500,000 to be a chronic underaccumulator, spending in lockstep with every raise and ending each year no further ahead than the last. The salary tells you almost nothing about which category someone falls into. Only the spending behavior does. Why the math feels different at the top. At $50,000 in income, your housing is constrained by what a landlord will approve you for. At $300,000, banks will happily qualify you for a mortgage that stretches your budget just as thin. It just involves a much bigger number attached to it. A household earning $80,000 might spend $2,000 a month on housing. A household earning $350,000 might spend $9,000 a month. Both families are often spending a nearly identical share of their take-home pay on shelter. Both feel equally boxed in. The high earner just has a more expensive version of the same lack of flexibility. Layer on private school tuition, 2 car payments, a country club membership, a vacation property carrying costs year-round even when nobody's using it. These stop functioning like discretionary spending and start behaving like fixed costs. Pulling a kid out of private school feels like failure. Selling the second property feels like admitting the plan didn't work. Downgrading the car feels like a public confession. The lifestyle becomes almost impossible to reverse, which is exactly why the trap tightens instead of loosening as income grows. There's a particular danger in how these commitments arrive. They rarely show up all at once. The mortgage gets locked in first, sized to what the bank says the household can afford, rather than what it should comfortably spend. Then the private school enrollment happens because the local public option feels inadequate once you're already living in a certain kind of neighborhood. Then the second car arrives because 2 working parents in a spread-out suburb genuinely need it. None of these decisions look reckless individually. Collectively, they build a monthly obligation so large that the 6-figure paycheck barely covers it, leaving the household one bad month away from real strain, despite an income most Americans would consider untouchable. Where the money actually leaks. The categories are rarely dramatic. They're small, repeated, and invisible in the moment. Convenient spending, food delivery, ride shares, subscription stacking creeps upward every year without anyone noticing the total. Individually, these are $8 and $15 and $22 charges. Annually, stacked together, they routinely add up to several $1,000s that vanish without leaving anything behind. The high-income version of this pattern just uses bigger numbers with identical psychology. First class instead of economy. Resort hotels instead of anything more modest. Restaurants replacing home cooking most nights of the week. Each individual swap feels minor and earned. Together, they require the entire paycheck just to sustain, leaving nothing behind when the paycheck stops. Credit behavior tells the rest of the story. It's a common misconception that credit card debt is mostly a lower income problem. In reality, high earners carry a disproportionate share of total consumer credit card debt relative to their share of the population. The mechanism is different than at lower incomes. Lower income households often use credit to survive a shortfall before the next paycheck. Higher income households frequently use it to maintain a lifestyle that technically fits the income on paper, but leaves zero room for anything unexpected. Different reasons, same outcome. Money owed, interest accruing, and a growing sense that the income isn't actually working for them. There's also a subtler leak that rarely gets discussed. The cost of maintaining appearances among peers who are equally leveraged. High earners often socialize with other high earners, which means the comparison set is never the median American household. It's other people making similar money and spending it just as fast. Everyone in the group looks financially fine because everyone is spending at the same unsustainable rate. Nobody in that circle provides the reality check that might otherwise interrupt the pattern, because nobody in the circle has interrupted it either. The moving goalpost. Here's the part that keeps the trap self-perpetuating. Surveys asking Americans what net worth qualifies as wealthy or even just comfortable consistently find the number climbing every single year, often into the millions. often far above what the person answering the survey actually holds. The gap between what people believe they need and what they actually have keeps widening rather than closing. This creates a strange psychological trap of its own. Someone hits $500,000 in net worth and discovers comfortable now apparently requires $800,000. They hit that number and discover wealthy now means $2 million plus. No amount ever feels sufficient because the definition of enough keeps sliding out of reach, usually in direct proportion to what their peer group appears to have. Social comparison used to be limited to your actual neighbors. Now it's an infinite scroll of vacations, renovations, and purchases from people whose actual financial position you can't see. Researchers studying this pattern have specifically flagged keeping up behavior as a direct driver of paycheck-to-paycheck living among six-figure earners. You end up comparing your real financial life to a curated highlight reel of people who might be even more leveraged than you are and losing. Geography compounds this further. Someone earning $350,000 in a high-cost coastal city is often surrounded by people earning similarly large salaries and spending nearly all of it on housing alone. The local definition of normal gets distorted upward. A home that would be considered spacious and comfortable anywhere else in the country reads as modest in that environment, which pushes the internal goalpost for enough even further out of reach, regardless of what the income actually supports once the rest of life is factored in. The cost of waiting. The people who actually build wealth on high incomes tend to share one behavior that almost nobody trapped in this cycle practices. They treat saving as a fixed, non-negotiable cost, not something left over after everything else gets paid. Research on millionaire behavior consistently points to savings rates in the range of 15% or higher taken off the top before lifestyle spending happens at all. The difference between saving 5% and saving 15% doesn't look dramatic in year 1. It becomes enormous by year 20. Someone earning $300,000 who saves 30% builds roughly $90,000 a year in contributions before any investment growth. At a reasonable long-term average return, compounded over 2 decades, that becomes several $1,000,000. The same earner saving 5% accumulates a small fraction of that, often under $1 million, over the identical time frame, despite an identical salary. Same income, same years worked, a multi-million-dollar difference in outcome, entirely explained by one percentage. That's the real cost of the high-income poverty trap, not the missed vacations or the smaller house, the lost decades of compounding that never happened because the income got spent instead of directed. And unlike almost any other financial mistake, this one can't be corrected later by simply earning more. The years themselves are the ingredient that can't be replaced. A dollar invested at 30 is worth dramatically more by retirement than the same dollar invested at 45, no matter how much larger the paycheck becomes in between. Breaking the pattern, escaping. This requires confronting a question most high earners actively avoid. What is all of this spending actually accomplishing? The architect earning $500,000 could plausibly save $150,000 a year if she chose to. She earns enough. She's simply structured her life to spend enough that she can't. That doesn't mean the answer is deprivation. Someone who genuinely values private school or travel or a nicer home should absolutely spend on those things, but consciously understanding what it costs in trade, not automatically because that's the default at their income level. The trap isn't about spending money, it's about spending it on autopilot, one reasonable sounding decision at a time until the entire paycheck is spoken for before it even arrives. The fix that actually works isn't about willpower, it's structural. Saving what's left after spending almost never works because there's rarely anything left. Spending what's left after saving works far more reliably because the money is gone before the temptation to spend it ever shows up. Automate the investment contribution the day the paycheck lands. Let the rest of the money exist in an account you barely think about. Live off what remains. Someone earning $400,000 who automates $120,000 a year into investments will still live extremely well on the remaining $280,000. They'll simply live a version of well that leaves something behind, instead of a version that requires the paycheck to keep arriving forever, on schedule, without interruption, for the rest of their working life. The uncomfortable truth is that this requires deciding in advance what enough looks like, and then holding that line even as the income keeps climbing. Without that decision, every raise simply becomes fuel for the next upgrade, and the finish line keeps moving exactly as fast as you run toward it. Back to Austin. The architect from the beginning of this video isn't a bad example of financial planning because she's reckless. She's an entirely typical example of what happens when spending expands automatically alongside income, without anyone ever pausing to ask whether it should. Somewhere across town from her is someone earning half of what she makes with a fraction of the visible lifestyle and roughly 10 times the actual financial security. Because at some point they decided what enough looked like, and they stopped letting their spending answer that question for them. Both outcomes are available at nearly any income level. The salary was never actually the variable that mattered. What you do with it always was.